Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Sheriff's Mic, cleared to talk with me, Sheriff Honea. You know, Butte County has been no stranger to wildfires. I think that's probably an understatement. Unfortunately, we still hold the very grim record of having the deadliest and one of the most destructive fires in the history of California. That is the Camp Fire. We've had a whole host of other fires as well. As a result of that, my working relationship and the working relationship of the Butte County Sheriff's Office has become very close to that or with that of the CalFire or Butte County Fire. And as we move closer into the more intense part of fire season here in Butte County, I thought it'd be good for us to sit down with our fire chief, Butte County Fire Chief Garrett Sjolund. Garrett, welcome.
Yes,
Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Sheriff, for having me today.
Yeah. So, you know, CalFire has been part of Butte County's fire history for many, many decades now, right?
Yep.
And I'm not sure that people fully understand the relationship that CalFire has with Butte County Fire. And I think this is a good opportunity for us to kind of explain that to people, let them understand that. Tell us how that all works.
Absolutely. So it's 94 years they've been in contract now with the state CalFire to provide the fire services locally here in Butte County. And Butte County, you know, was grown out of the gold rush and then that era, and a lot of things weren't organized here in Butte County as we came into the 1900s. And so in about 1920s or so, volunteerism and volunteer firefighters started to organize, and the state recognized that there was also a need to come about and look at the watershed here in Butte County and how to preserve the wildlands, if you will, the timber industry, and the recreation that's available here in our county. And so they assigned a state forester, if you will, to help manage those situations, and specifically the wildland fires that were happening here. And that was the time in the 1930s by now that the county recognized they needed to establish a countywide fire department as well. So they took the partnership with the state, which came with some funding, and worked directly with the Board of Supervisors on establishing the Butte County Fire Department. And as a matter of fact, the first station was in Nord, between the state and the county bought the first fire engine.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you said 94 years, this relationship?
94 years this year, yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Is that the longest standing collaboration between the state and county that you're aware of?
It's not.
It's not. Okay.
It's about 2 or 3. Tehama County started just before us, and then Riverside County was about the same time. So it's argumentatively. I always say we are the number one here in the North State, but we are not. We are number 2 or 3 statewide.
So essentially, the County of Butte contracts with CalFire to staff the county fire department. Is that an accurate way to say that?
Yes, to manage it, staff it, and oversee it. So I wear 2 hats, the state and the county fire chief, which can be challenging at times.
I can imagine.
But yes, so I work on behalf of the Board of Supervisors and the county government to provide that fire protection here. And it's really, it's to understand the whole concept of the relationship. The state is responsible for state responsibility areas, which is wildland firefighting. Mm-hmm. Anything to do with structure firefighting, medical aids, car wrecks, all of those sort of things are the responsibility of Butte County Fire Department.
Okay.
And so working together with our resources makes us super effective here in Butte County, because it's not only cost effective, having the personnel working for the same agency allows us to shift resources seamlessly throughout the county, and really the citizens don't recognize the name on the door of the fire engine. They just get the level of service they need.
Yeah. How many other counties in California have a similar model? Do you know?
In totality, I do not, but I know Tehama County locally, Shasta County Fire Department has theirs. There's some other pockets of smaller Schedule A when you go down to Placer County, and then smaller agreements. But in Northern California, we are the largest agreement with CalFire. The Butte County Fire Department is. And
it even goes beyond that. Correct me if I'm wrong, because you're also the fire chief in Paradise, Gridley, Oroville, Biggs, right? All of the cities in Butte County contract with CalFire, with the exception of Chico. Is that correct?
Yep. Seven total fire departments, and I oversee 6 of them, including CalFire.
Yeah. And you talk about being able to leverage resources. Having that continuity between the county and the majority of the cities has got to pay dividends with regard to that continuity of service and leveraging the resources.
It does. We all operate out of the same emergency command center for dispatch, so we have standard response plans that we use with amongst all 6 fire departments. The personnel can move from one funded by one department to the other on overtime days and those callback days and things seamlessly. So we have a pool of about 450 personnel here in the county that we can utilize across all of those different contracts that we work with.
The other thing that I have seen, regrettably, time and time again here in Butte County when we have faced catastrophic fires is not only do we have Butte County CalFire and the fact that there's continuity with the cities, but you also are backstopped by this massive, very well-equipped organization that is CalFire statewide, right?
Yes.
And as a result of that, it's not uncommon for you to bring statewide resources to bear, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I know that, from time to time, people talk about, should we go away from CalFire, start a county fire department, or in that case, some of the cities recently have talked about or have gone from having city departments to CalFire. I think Oroville's the latest city that has contracted with CalFire. Is that correct?
3 years ago, yes.
Yeah, right.
Yep,
and I think they're coming up for contract renewals.
They are.
Yeah.
We'll be going to the council here shortly with a renewal and see how much longer they want to continue that. And I suspect they will.
Yeah.
No, nothing saying they won't. But yes.
Yeah. Well, I do know that especially when disaster strikes, having that bench that is so deep and with so much technical skill, so many resources, has really paid huge dividends for us in a lot of respects, right?
Yes. Yeah, having the continuity of operations amongst the agency and all the cooperative agreements that we have here provides that seamless ability for us as leaders to work together at the ground level. They know each other. They work with each other for these fires and disasters that we have throughout Butte County on a daily basis. So we know how to communicate. We know how to exercise those needs to address what's going on with the emergency.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've been in law enforcement for over 30 years now, and how long have you been in the fire service?
29 years with CalFire this month, June 1st.
Well, congratulations. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So between the two of us, a lot of years in the public safety sector. When I sit and think, when I first started my law enforcement career back when I was working patrol, it was rare that we would have a massive fire that would require a law enforcement response. I mean, I can only think of a couple of times where law enforcement had to move into the area and help with the evacuations. But now it is almost weekly, especially during the height of fire season in the summer. 2 or 3 times a week, it seems, that we are deploying resources collectively to address the threat of wildfire. So my question is, do you have a sense of why that is? Why do we have so many more fires now than we used to?
Yeah, I think it's a cumulative effort or a result of a lot of things happening.
Okay.
And whether you agree or not on the whole global warming and all of that, there has been a change in our atmosphere and the amount of water that it carries during the summertime. And we've seen that through some of our droughts. And how I see this happening is we have a lot of dead fuel moisture and things out there in the forest that is not being taken care of through preventative maintenance out there, as far as fuel reduction and those sort of things. This has been going on for decades. This isn't starting to last.
Right.
But here in Butte County, we've seen an increase really since about 2000, right? So 2000 to last 25 years, we've seen these devastating fires hit this county, and they seem to just keep getting bigger and more complex with each year. And my research and looking at what's going on with these this climate and things happening is really that the experts are saying somewhere in 2030s we'll start having what would become the average fire size. We are in a period where the winds and the dry fuels and things are causing these larger fires, but we're also in a period where when you look at some of the regulations and things that have come into the state over the years, I think some of those things are beginning to catch up to us, and they're being recognized by the governor's office. You saw that he had an executive order, emergency order, to reduce some of the CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act requirements, and really look at some of our CARB compliance things, because when we have these fires, all of the work that we're doing in the background to reduce emissions, to reduce the carb on building houses and things gets negated by one fire in the middle of summer, such as the park fire, decades of work and habits. So how do we approach this problem? How do we get there? It's not something that is going to happen overnight, but we've got to recognize some of our regulations are holding back the progress that we should be making out there that we need to get to someday.
I think that is really interesting because I've thought a lot about this myself, of course. And, if I understand what it takes to make a fire, you need fuel, you need an oxygen or air source, and you need an ignition source, right? And there is a lot of fuel out there, which in some part can be attributed, as you said, to climate change in terms of the moisture content. More fuel grows, it dries out, that kind of thing. But managing fuels is an important part of that, right? And if I understand correctly, some of the policies that have been in place for decades are coming back to haunt us because we haven't managed those fuels correctly.
Yeah.
Is that a fair statement?
And I mean, I started my career 29 years ago in 1996, and we weren't doing fuel reduction.
Yeah.
We were not broadcast burning, and it all but got shut off because of our regulations for air quality and things in around the year 2000.
Yeah.
And we've been slowly gaining traction back to get that, but it takes a long time to flip that over and get to where we need to be with what we're doing out there.
So it's interesting, in terms of the regulations, and I'm not entirely sure how much this relates to it, but when I was a kid growing up, I was growing up in Susanville, California, and the primary industry there was lumber, logging. Sierra Pacific owned a huge lumber mill. And I remember as a kid them talking about them not being able to log the forest because of the spotted owl. I don't know if that's something you remember, but that seems to be in line with regulations, obviously designed to address one issue, but to the exclusion or ignoring the potential impact related to other issues, right?
Right.
And it seems like time and time again with regard to California public policy, they overemphasize one issue and forget the impact on other issues, and that it creates all kinds of problems for us going forward.
Yeah. And it's, as humans, we tend to overdo things sometimes and not think about what that's going to look like in the future, I feel, and we do that with our building standards.
Okay.
And when we look at that and we look at the campfire scenario, I'll refer to them as legacy housing. Okay. So when we talk about that dead fuel model out there that's in the forest, when we build a house out of wood, it's a dead fuel model.
Right.
And so a lot of our regulations where we are today didn't exist with those legacy houses, So as we had a fire such as the campfire move from the wildland into the, urbanized areas, if you will, that fuel model is essentially a house going from house to house. And we see that the things we've learned on home hardening, such as how we build homes, how we strengthen them against wildland fires, and now the new Zone 0 that's coming out. When you look at those standards, we are getting there in places like Paradise because we've had to start over. But there's so many places in California that have legacy homes. They have their bushes and gardens and things around their home that they very much enjoy. All of us like to go out on the back porch, have a cup of coffee and a conversation
for sure
with our loved ones. But in reality, how does that fit into the urbanized lifestyle when you live next to the wildland urban interface and a community, and what are regulations and how are we enforcing those moving forward to better protect our communities?
Yeah. So it's interesting, these mega fires that we've dealt with, they're clearly not contained to the wildland, right? They move into populated areas and they start burning homes and cars and all of the other things that are associated with that. And you talked a moment ago about how one fire can undo any progress that may have been realized with regard to, carbon in the air and air quality and things like that. Do you think that, there's a lot of that still out there. There's a lot of that potential still out there for us to have to deal with in Butte County, even though a lot of areas within Butte County have burned. Is that an accurate statement?
Absolutely. We've got about 160,000 acres of, I would say, the Butte Creek Canyon, Upper Magalia, Butte Meadows. It's really untouched by a large fire here in Butte County. And then there's a pocket in our southern part of our county above Bangor and Forbstown that hasn't been touched. But outside of that, about 40% of our eastern side of Butte County has been touched or burnt by a wildland fire over the course of the last 20, 25 years. So yeah, it's some of it's ready to reburn or potentially could reburn. We look at Concal, where 6 years later, about every 10 years, we have a fire. 8 to 10 years, we have a fire in Concal.
Yeah.
And so that cycle is very close to happening again.
Yeah, so just because it's burned doesn't mean it's safe, right? Because we have to deal with it. And you're potentially dealing with a different kind of fire because there's different kind of fuels that come in. Is that correct?
It is. A lot of it gets land conversion from timber, if you will, and spotted brush to more of a brush component.
Okay.
Because the trees are killed off, especially when you look in the Concal Basin and those areas that have seen fire so much in the last 20 years. You just see a brush component coming back that will propagate to the level of being able to burn again.
Yeah.
Based on the wind patterns that come through Jarbo Gap and those sort of things, those will happen again.
Yeah.
Because we do see it. We see it every year.
Yeah. So when I look back over the last, nearly 10 years, I look at some of how these fires developed, and certainly there were some big fires that occurred in Butte County prior to the Camp Fire. But I think most of the people here in Butte County were impacted in one way or another by the Camp Fire, if you happen to live in this area at that time. But then beyond that, the North Complex Fire, the Bear Fire comes to mind, the Wildfire, then most recently the Park Fire, these massive fires. And then there's all these fires in between, right?
Yeah.
That were, in years past, would have been significant. We would have remembered them, but they didn't rise to the catastrophic level of those fires that I named. What's interesting to me, and I look at what transpired in Los Angeles, right, with the Palisades Fire and the Eaton Fire, and I see, as I was watching that unfold, and I'm wondering what your perspective is, but as I was watching that unfold, I was seeing that they were dealing with many of the same challenges that we dealt with in the Camp Fire and the North Complex Fire. And it was as if, in many respects, that was all being reinvented for the first time. What was your take on that in terms of that perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. You could almost watch the press conferences and anticipate what the next issue was going to arise, the next conversation.
Yeah,
very much felt the same way. And I think having the experience that we have here in Butte County, because we relived that basically for the last 5 to 6 years at some level, unfortunately. It's new for those folks down there, and I don't. I wonder, how can we do it better? How can we communicate better and have an understanding that this isn't something new? It just happened in a new location, right?
Yeah, and interestingly enough, the other part of the perception that I had was that I think that bigger counties, bigger agencies have a tendency to operate in a more siloed fashion. They don't necessarily look outward for experiences that they could draw from. And I think LA County is a huge county. They have a massive fire department, massive law enforcement presence, and I don't think that they often think about whether or not something that a smaller county went through would be applicable to them in terms of how they would address those kinds of things. It was regrettable and unfortunate, as you said, when you saw that, hey, they are dealing with the same things that we were dealing with. And we have figured out the answers to that. Granted, there's a bigger scale, but nonetheless, we figured out the answer to that. And it's unfortunate those lessons hadn't been conveyed or transferred earlier. The other piece that I think is interesting is there seems to now be a much, much broader awareness statewide and perhaps nationwide, given the how massive that catastrophe was, and certainly that population. They have a much bigger media market. It tends to make its way out across the country, whereas if something happens in Northern California, that's not always the case.
Yeah, I think you saw that this summer. I think the Park Fire is really the second largest fire in the state's history. That's single ignition, and it's the largest arson charged fire at this point in the state's history. But the smoke was blowing north.
Yeah,
it wasn't blowing to the south.
Right.
I think if it had been blowing the other direction, there might have been some different outcomes, and some of the things that we may have been dealing with as far as the level of complexity and things. But I will say that we were extremely supported with the state CalFire and, of course, your agency here in Butte County. I think how we handled the park fire with our experience was extremely well done. I think we were ahead of the curve the whole time.
Yeah.
I never thought there was ever a moment where our folks on the ground working at the tailgate of the pickup weren't making the decisions that they needed to make, and I think needed to make to be successful. So I think having that local ability to work together, like you mentioned, day in and day out, really shined in that first 24 to 48 hours there with the park fire.
I wholeheartedly agree with you, and I remember many conversations prior to the park fire talking about how a fire blowing through Cohasset was our worst nightmare, right? Given the fact that there is extraordinarily limited ways to get in and out of Cohasset. And if a fire overtook those, it would be very, very problematic. We have continually, both your agency and mine, worked to try to improve our response to these wildfires and that move into populated areas. And you're right. I think that we've learned our lessons, or learned a lot of lessons rather, from the experience we had with the Camp Fire and then North Complex Fire. And as we've moved through all these, one of the things that I have noticed is two areas. One, we are much, much quicker to start the alert and warning process. And I want to get into that in a minute in terms of give people a little behind the scenes of what that looks like. The other thing too is that it seems like on your guys' end, you are very quick to throw a lot of resources at the fire very, very early on. Is that an accurate perception?
It is.
Okay.
One of the things when I came in as the fire chief 3 years ago, we looked at our dispatch plan.
Okay.
And what that looked like as far as the number of engines and aircraft and things that we have on different levels based on the ability of our fuels to burn throughout Butte County. And that's analyzed hourly here. We actually analyze that hourly, the fire conditions, and adjust our dispatch levels. And so we have increased the resources that do respond on those high fire danger days, such as we've seen already here in May.
Yeah. There seems to be also a increased and more urgent use of aircraft. Is that is that true?
It is, yes. Yeah. And so I think well, I can say that the state not only positioned resources here as far as an additional helicopter, but the county fire department has also worked to enhance that with a helicopter this last summer, and that really provided a big boost to our local cooperative ability to strike at a fire even that much faster with water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's get into this whole area of alert and warning, because that's where we frequently intersect, alert and warning and the evacuation piece of it. As I explain it to people, the sheriff's office or the law enforcement is responsible for the alert and warning, and then the evacuation piece that allows the firefighters hopefully to spend time putting out the fire.
Right.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
But it's not, we don't operate in a silo, right? It is a very, very collaborative effort. I don't issue evacuation warnings or orders in a particular community without getting data from our counterparts in the fire service to tell us, where we should do that. Can you explain what goes into that decision making? How do you decide what areas you think we should warn, and then, if necessary, order?
So it's what the fire's doing, right?
Okay.
Where it's heading, which direction it's heading. A lot of it is understanding your local communities,
Okay.
What the impacts are, whether that's whole schools, just the whole sort of thing. And this decision-making process, as you mentioned, isn't done in a silo.
No.
It's usually a fire gets to a point where it starts to gain speed, if you will, gain size, and at that point, there's usually a sergeant or somebody that's right next to our battalion chiefs, right there at the back of the pickup.
Correct.
Right? And that's
Near where the fire is.
Yes, yeah. Exactly. Right there, right in front of it, and they're making those decisions. And one of the things we've learned, if you will, post campfire and the whole strategy, and you talked about this, is we go to these fires every day during the summer, and we think bigger picture. Mm-hmm. We're not just thinking, we used to have just streets, right? And then a few years after the campfire, we ended up making zones, right? That made it a lot easier for us to navigate that warning and order scenario that you guys handle, right? It made it easier for our commanders to say, hey, these zones right here should go into warning, and we recommend these for for orders, and then your folks take that forward and make it happen. So I think how we've developed the process is a lot faster than just specifically naming from this road to that road, kind of the old school way of doing things.
Exactly.
We've moved past that, so it's triggered the ability for you to be a lot faster on those notifications, reach that population through all the different platforms that really weren't available to us, 5 years ago. So that effectiveness starts with those two individuals, at the back of a tailgate with a map and understanding, what is it happening? Do we have the resources there to contain it? Or is this a situation where we feel we need to err on the side of caution, which we typically do now.
Right.
And we make those notifications much further out in front than we were in years past.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. And that brings up a good point, because in addition to the fire behavior, I also understand that there is a level of knowledge within your staff as to the geography and how the geography will impact fire. There are certain drainages that once the fire gets out there, it's going to run down that drainage. It's going to potentially impact those communities. And so as a result of that, and you mentioned the fact that we are projecting the threat out much farther and much sooner than perhaps what we used to, or definitely much faster than we used to. And that's as a product of learning how quickly things can change and how hard it is to get people out of the area when we've ordered an evacuation. So with that in mind, one of the things that you talk about was trying to streamline the process of letting people know where the threat is and what we want them to ultimately do, which pushed us towards creating this entire zone system, right? And we have zones throughout the entire county. Is that correct?
Yeah, all the cities and everything.
Yeah, and they all correspond or match up, so there's no overlap, there's no duplication of zone numbers. Right. If you know your zone number, then you can be fairly sure that you'll understand what we're talking about when we issue a warning or alert. But there are other zones you probably ought to know too, right? Not just where you live, but if your kids go to school.
School, yep.
If you have a loved one who has a hard time evacuating on their own, you should probably know their zone, where you work, all those kinds of things. And we've spent a lot of time trying to hammer that out, right?
Oh, boy.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, we just recently recorded a public service announcement that's going to go out, correct?
Yes.
And talking about that whole know your zone. If you hear the warning, be ready to go. If you get the order, go immediately, right? Yeah.
It's a local initiative, Be Ready Butte, and that is to help educate through your processes and then what the fire department doing is, and it's the whole thing, prevention, all of it, right? Yeah. Getting people educated is a resource out there,
Yeah. You also talked about the fact that we message across multiple platforms now, which is something that when I was first in law enforcement or began my career, that wasn't available to us. We didn't do that. I think at best you might send some cops into a neighborhood, have them knock on doors, and hope you got everybody, right?
Yeah, it was house to house. There was no, reverse 911. There wasn't anything, right?
Yeah.
They were just literally face to face, and hopefully neighbors were calling neighbors, right? The phone tree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now we've recognized that you have to message across these multiple platforms, and so we have our social media presence, we have our emergency mass notification system, we use iPause, we use door-to-door, we use the high-low siren, we use the FM alert. I mean, just all of these things, right? The redundancy. But even with all of that, it's still not foolproof, right? You can't guarantee that everybody's going to get the message, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. It takes the end user, right, to want to be engaged. And I think that's the part where, as we come into the summer months right now, as we're talking here today, is if you live in the eastern part of Butte County, you need to be prepared to leave.
Right.
And that's anywhere east of 99, 149, 70, that you need to think about what you're going to do if a wildland fire starts. Right?
Yeah.
And take it seriously when we put those warnings out there. If you're not comfortable, pack your stuff and go.
Yes.
That's what we're saying, and especially on red flag warning days, think about it. Think about, hey, do we maybe want to put some of the stuff in the car right now?
Yeah.
just in case something happens. And that's the culture we'd like to see people get to, engaging, right? Not just being reactive to a situation that's not going away in Butte County.
No, not at all.
Fires are not going away.
Right.
I wish they would,
Yeah.
But they're not.
I agree. So not only do you have to tune into, I think you have to tune into multiple platforms because technology can fail, especially in catastrophic situations. And we saw that. We saw that at the campfire. We saw that at other things where when cell towers go down, right,
Yes.
you may not be able to ultimately get your message out. The other thing that I think is important is there's a lot of people who live in populated areas like the city of Chico, right, or the town of Paradise, who probably never thought they would be threatened by a fire that started in some remote location in Butte County, right?
Yeah.
That's changed for all of us.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think those fire hazard severity zones that the state has put out for local response areas, and here in Butte County, they're being rolled out this month here to a lot of places, actually everywhere in Butte County. That illustrates the risk of living in those eastern edges of the wildland, if you will, through our communities of Orville, Palermo, Chico, all those areas, not just Paradise and the mountain communities that we have, right? And taking into fact that it is a real threat. And how do you prepare your home? How do you prepare yourself and your people to get out, and if you need to, and where you're going to go and what you're going to do?
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about that because I think that's important. We say be ready to go. What does that mean? What do you want people to be ready to do?
Leave.
Okay.
I think that's our goal, right?
Yeah.
So we want people ready to leave, but
Yeah.
they tend to not think about, their pets. What are they going to do with that? Their important documents, those sort of things as human nature, right? Until the incident happens, and then sometimes it's too late.
Yeah.
You got to remember when a fire starts, we are trying our best to control it and stop it. Mm-hmm. That is what we're trying to do. Really, it's the only disaster we get out in front of on a daily basis to try to stop, right? And 2% of the time, we are not successful, and those become the park fire and those sort of things, to where the winds and the terrain and the heat and all that comes together in alignment, and we're not able to get our hands around the incident. So it's not very often that these fires get big, but when they do, we struggle with trying to get people out of the way.
Right.
And we want people to realize that we don't have control of fire when it starts. We do our best to stop it. Sometimes we're successful. 98% of the time we are. 2% of the time we struggle with that because of all the factors that are involved.
So it's interesting you talk about that because wildfires are what I call no notice events. There are no notice emergencies.
Worst time of the day, whatever you're doing,
Yeah, and unlike hurricanes, where you're able to see that it's going to make landfall 3 days from now, you can warn people, you can set up shelters, you can get people out. We just don't have that with wildfires. It could happen, and the next thing you know, we're in a situation where we're putting out warnings, or it could go immediately to an order depending on how rapidly it's moving, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this whole idea of being prepared, being ready, the wrong time to be thinking about what you need to do to be ready to go is when the warning is issued. That's work that has to be done in advance of that. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Make sure you have gas in your car, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. It's interesting. I remember during the park fire, I was up in Cohasset, and we got the news that the fire was going to come across Cohasset Road, and we were pulling resources out because we were worried about get them cut off. And there were at least 3 people who didn't have fuel in their car, and they couldn't get gas at the market up there because the power was gone. And they were literally coasting down Cohasset Road, empty, in neutral. And at some point, they flattened out and couldn't go anymore and had to be pushed off the road. So during fire season, you got to make sure that you have fuel in your vehicle, that you can get out of there. I love the comment that you made about making sure that animals are, you have the ability to get the animals. I'm sure you're aware of the rescue of those dogs that are one of our search and rescue members and pilots did during the park fire. But that was a good example of needing to be ready to deal with whatever those circumstances are if you have them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You got to think about it ahead of time.
Yeah. So the thing that I've noticed too is that once you issue a warning, Inevitably you'll have some people who heed the warning. Others are like, I've been through this before. It's not, not going to. And I will tell you, I worry sometimes about the what I call the cry wolf effect, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we're continually warning and ordering and people don't think that it's necessary, my concern is that they'll stop paying attention to us. Do you have a similar concern?
Absolutely. And I think you and I exercised that during the park fire.
Yes.
There's a picture of you and I kind of beating the map.
There is.
And we had that back and forth discussion about this very topic. Is it time to do this, and what zones? And those conversations are tough.
Yeah.
They're hard because you're absolutely right. You don't want to oversaturate the citizens out there. Every time there's a fire, they're under a warning. They want them to take it serious.
Yeah.
And I think leading back to our conversation about experience, I think we're there and we're balanced here in Butte County. But it's difficult. It's a difficult decision for us to make as leaders, right?
Right.
But we're not doing it because we just think it's good to happen. We're doing it because it is a reason to happen. We need you to be ready to go or leave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up because I think that's a really great story to tell. You're right. There's a picture of you and I sitting over a map, and people may not know this, but we were minutes away from ordering an evacuation of Magalia and Paradise, right?
Yes.
And it was based on variables and decisions that were taken into account prior to you and I kind of getting involved in the conversation, right? Not to say that that was the right decision based on the information that they had at the time.
Yes.
But both from your end as well as my end, we went out and looked at the conditions again, came back in, met with the incident commander who did a fantastic job, and had a really tough decision to make and started evaluating, well, what risks do we have to consider the most, right? And we called that off, right, within minutes of it going out because we were, one, concerned about the panic that would cause, the trauma that would cause to those residents, the fact that it would divert a lot of resources. But I don't know about you, but I spent that whole night kind of on pins and needles hoping that we'd made the right decision.
Yeah, it's tough, and we have to live with it, right?
Yeah.
Good or bad. So I think us having that local ability to understand what our communities are dealing with plays into that decision-making process, and understanding fire conditions and where that fire is and what it would do based on what we've seen happen in our county played into a huge role
For sure.
of making that decision. So it was probably by far one of the most educated decisions that I've had to make in this position. But I think as local leaders, it was on our shoulders to evaluate that. And I think we did it properly.
Yeah.
And I think we did it in the best interest for our citizens, and it was successful.
I agree. And a lot of that has the fact that our relationship is so good and we have a lot of trust with each other. And what I tell people who know about that is both decisions were correct. The decision to ramp that evacuation order up based on what the factors were being at the time was the right decision. And then we came in with some other information, some knowledge of the local area, and changed the decision, but it was the right decision at the time. And so it's an interesting thing how you can have two correct decisions that come to different conclusions, but at the end, it was the right way to go. Yeah.
It probably didn't make the folks living up there any more uneasy.
True.
I think a lot of folks were on edge throughout that night, but I think that by us evaluating what is the best interest of them, we made the right decision.
Yeah. No, I agree. And it goes back to this is sometimes there's an art to this in addition to some science, right?
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of it's just, there's a lot of experience, I think, when we've been through these, like we've talked about here today, I think just being able to quantify that is huge.
Yeah.
Having local leadership and local firefighters and people that have grown up here, gone to school here, understand it, lived through it, have their families to go through it. Making that decision is really on a personal level because it affects your officers,
Absolutely.
affects my firefighters as well because they're evacuating their families and things as too. So all of those components I think come in to play when we make those decisions. We're not just doing it arbitrarily.
Yeah. So that's what leads me to that. When we do make that decision, when we do issue an order, we try to get as many people out as possible. Of course, you're going to have people who decide that they're going to stay. They, and in many respects, they do so at their own peril, because there could come a time when we don't have the ability to go in and rescue them, right? And we've seen that play out, unfortunately, right?
Yes.
The other thing that I know as sheriff, who's been responsible for issuing these orders, is about 10 seconds after you issue an order, people are putting pressure on you to lift the order and get them right back in, right?
Yeah.
And especially if the fire doesn't seem to be approaching that area, or if the fire is burned through the area, people want to know, why can't we get back in? Why can't we get back in? Explain a little bit about why it takes us time to lift an order once an order has been issued and we've evacuated the area.
So I think when we have a scenario where the fire has not burnt through an area, it's a lot easier to do.
Sure.
Right? So I think we're talking about, hey, the fire has burnt through this community or this area. And so we're dealing with a lot of things, what is the conditions of the road? There could have been some things, burnt on the road. Is it safe to travel? Is there power lines down? Is there burnt vehicles that we need to move out of the way? There's a litany of things that we need to make sure before we turn the public back in there, because we want to make sure it's safe for them and they don't get injured.
Absolutely.
Is there been loss of structure? And we understand that they want to get back and check on their home. They want to see what happened to their houses. But are they safe to get in there where we won't be injured further if we do allow them back in? And we, I think, again, back to looking at the park fire this last year, we took into account those things, and I think we really honed in on the cooperating agencies and stakeholders that are involved with that repopulation, and put pressure on them to get their work done in a timely fashion so that we could get these people back in there to start the grieving process in a lot of sense.
I love the fact that you say that, because you're absolutely right. If people could see that there are times when you and I are really putting pressure on utility companies and other people to get their work done, recognizing how hard it is to have people displaced from their homes. We don't issue warnings or orders without a lot of thoughtful consideration. And likewise, we don't lift them without the same kind of consideration, but there's definitely a push, right, to get people back. And sometimes there's that tension, right, that happens.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've had some tough conversations with people as a result of that, right?
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about, where we were at with public safety funding. Measure H was a big thing. You and I were both very, very supportive of that. We saw what the world would have been like had we not been properly resourced. What has that done for your department?
So the biggest push was increasing our staffing to 3 people on a fire engine.
Yeah.
That is the industry sort of standard. That's what the rest of Butte County, when we look at the cities, are staffed at. So it provided us the ability to respond to these fires with the same number of resources, but with that additional body, allows that much more of an impact in controlling the situation that we're faced with in a lot faster manner. We don't have to wait for that additional fire engine to come in and help. So it's been huge.
Yeah.
When I started 30 years ago, there was 1 person on a fire engine.
That's crazy.
For 8 months of the year in 1995. And in 1999, we moved to 2 people. So really 25 years has taken us to get to this point. So it's going to be a huge impact on our ability to mitigate incidents throughout the unincorporated area of Butte County.
How is the effort going to get that staffing up to that level?
It's a challenge. It is with any industry out there.
Yep.
Is not only finding the right people, but the qualified people, and then putting them through the training that we need to do. We're in the process of getting all 10 engines to that level. We're at 7 now.
Okay.
And we anticipate here in the next 3-4 months to be able to get that staffing level up to the last 3 fire engines out there in Butte County Fire Department.
Fantastic. Well, I can tell you that we work so cooperatively together in fire and law, not only in fires, but just in day-to-day calls for service. It's not uncommon for my deputies to go to calls that we need medical assistance, fire rolls out. So it's a very close working relationship. And I've always believed that it's important for us to be properly resourced across the board, because when that thing happens that is going to, create all kinds of disaster and destruction, you want to have a good start. And you have a good start when you have the right resources on duty at the particular time.
Yep.
Yeah.
You've got to get organized and fight the fight that we're faced with. And I think having, like you say, the proper resources to do that, it's imperative
Yeah.
to us to do our jobs out there.
Yeah. Well, before we wrap up, I want to just say a couple things and then give you an opportunity to add to it. Number one, we want everyone to know their zone, correct?
Yes, know your zone.
Yeah. We want them to tune into more than one platform that we use to message, right? Be it social media, emergency mass notification, iPause, FM alert, right?
Yep.
We want that, right? And then when we do a warning, what do we want them to do?
Listen.
Right.
Listen.
Exactly.
Get ready.
Yeah.
If they haven't, that's your chance to organize.
Yeah.
And get ready to go.
Yeah. And when we issue the order, we want them to go.
Get out.
Right.
And understand that on the other side, we are also working with our other county officials and providing them locations to go to.
For sure. Exactly right. There's a whole process.
Yes, the whole process. So
Yeah.
there are places for them to go and get that support and resources if they don't have them.
Yeah. How about fuel reduction? Is there any? Are there any programs out there to help people with fuel reduction around their homes if they can't do it themselves?
There are, and
Okay.
through the Butte Fire Safe Council, there's chipper programs. There's a grazing goat program.
I've seen that. Yeah, exactly.
Into. Yeah. And we're working in a lot of communities across the county. In the South Paradise Project's 8,000 acres right now that we're working in. It's actually the footprint of the Humboldt Fire.
Okay.
So there's a lot of work happening out there. So visit their website.
Yeah.
Visit Be Ready Butte website. There's resources on there as well to look for and contact those individuals.
Fantastic. Chief, anything else you want to get out there?
Can we talk about arson?
100%.
Let's talk about arson.
Yeah, let's talk about arson. Let's do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we've had, as fire chief, one of the things that I've been faced with is how can we deal with these arson fires in Butte County?
Okay.
Last year we had 29 arson arrests, our CalFire peace officers, and a lot of folks don't understand that CalFire has a peace officer component. They're California peace officers.
Yeah.
And our focus is arson. And that's what we work on, and the team we've assembled here in Butte County is really doing a good job of that.
I agree,
and that's not without cooperation with yourself, the DA's office, and the other entities here in Butte County. But I look at 2024, and I look at the destructive fires and things that we have happened. We had the Thompson fire, an individual light a fireworks and throw it out. Right.
That's correct.
We had the Park fire, with the individual I know was going through the court system.
Yep.
That started that with a vehicle out on the grass. We had the Bidwell Mansion that
Yep.
was arson, and the litany and list goes on with vehicle fires and all this other sort of thing. And so I really want to try to get the message out there that if you are thinking about lighting a fire of arson in Butte County, you should think twice, because we will work with our cooperators, and we don't need this devastation to happen here in Butte County anymore, especially when it's done on malice or purposely done here in Butte County.
I agree, and I'm glad you brought that up too, because if it does serve as a warning, the investigative expertise of your guys, coupled with the cooperation that they get from other law enforcement agencies, is really remarkable. And the prospect of getting away with an arson, given all of the investigative techniques and technology that we can bring to bear, I think is getting less and less likely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I would agree.
And so, and regrettably, Butte County has been the site of a lot of arson fires. I don't know why that is, but it has been really unfortunate, right?
Yeah, I don't know why.
Yeah.
I don't know what draws it, but it's time to stop it in Butte County.
But you've also been very successful at catching them.
Yes.
Right? Right.
Yes.
So we need to knock that crap off.
You
right?
knock it off.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Anything else on the arson stuff? Okay.
No.
Sounds good. All right, Chief. Well, again, I really do appreciate you coming. I think this has been a great opportunity for us to sit down and kind of pull back the curtain and let people understand a little bit about how we make the decisions that we make and what we do. And it's always good to reiterate to people what our expectations are with regard to them being prepared and paying attention to the warnings and heeding the orders. So if you found this podcast informative, please like, share, and follow. And if you'd like to recommend a topic or a guest, you can email me at sheriffsmike@buttecounty.net. Thank you for listening, and until next time, stay safe, stay informed, and as always, you're cleared to talk.